Christmas, I was just worried. Did you get the dress done? I think actually what I thought might be happening were like little baby German short rows, which seemed like a nightmare. And it's just hovering inside of the fabric, like stretched out. Make sure there's some elastic in there. All right, girl.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora.
Hello, you guys. I'm Nora, and you're watching also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me for another podcast episode today. And as you can see, we are here to talk about the Christmas dress. I think that this episode's going to be just a little bit different from my typical podcast because really for the past week since we last spoke, I have been monogamously knitting on this dress. And so we're just going to breeze past the other whips that I have so that we can put as much focus on this dress as possible, especially because I do have quite a bit to say about it. The first thing that I'd like to get out of the way is, yes, I did finish it in time for Christmas. Oh, moral support overseas here. So yes, I did finish this just in time for Christmas. Unlike I would have preferred, it did get done on Christmas Eve. And if you watched the last video that I put out, oh, goodbye. If you saw the last video that I released, that was my everything I knit this year in 2023. And for those of you who stuck through to the very end, you will already know that I did finish this just in time. I haven't posted photos yet because it was Christmas. I didn't get a chance to take like our typical finished object photos. Quite literally, we snapped 2 pics in the road in front of my uncle's house before we started our Christmas festivities. So for now, those are the photos that we'll have to run with. I think maybe for Valentine's Day, I will do a proper photo shoot with this bad boy, just because it does require a little bit more gussying up for the photos that I would like. So yes, it got done. Thank you for watching everything I knit in 2023 if you have, and especially to those of you who made it to the end to see that it was done in time. So thanks so much for that. And also just for your curiosity, I think it's so funny the amount of people who were like, Christmas, I was just worried. Did you get the dress done? So we did. Yes. Now, when we spoke last, I was at that point of, okay, refresh. From the beginning, this is the Augustine's number 25 by Anne-Sophie Velling. However, my adaptations that I've made to the dress, or the modifications that I've made to this dress, were based on the version that I saw Vilma from Sage Knits and Things do on her own version of the Augustine's number 25 dress. Hers was the version that I saw that really made me think that is what I need to knit for Christmas this year. And so I did. It is a midi-length dress that is made up of this double layer of fabric in the bodice, which then turns into these delicious squishy honeycombs throughout the skirt. Mine is knit to a typical midi length. And then there is a, was it twisted rib? A ribbed hem and border with some eyelet details, and all of that makes up the hem. And then additionally, you attach these puffy sleeves, which are knit separately and then sewn on. And the construction of this dress is that it's primarily being held up with elastic that's running through these sleeves. I finished this dress in 42 days of knitting, and that's how long it was on my needles for. So I worked on this dress, or at least I had the dress on the needles for 42 days, and I knit mine out of Drops Fabelle held with Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk. So in their red colorway. Now, when we last spoke, I was at the point where I was ready to determine if it was time to start the hem on this dress or not. And in the pattern, and it's also possible that I maybe misread something, but it did say that the hem, or that border portion of the skirt, was to be made up of it was, I think, like 3.25 inches of fabric. And so I really did think that that was something I'd be able to just get done pretty lickety split in an evening. But that didn't happen. It actually took me like 3 days to get through the hem or the border of this dress. And that was, I think, just, I don't know, the twisted rib, the eyelet details. And I mean, there's just so many stitches on the needles at that point that everything was taking, I mean, a full round was taking like 15 minutes. It was just taking forever. And then you finish off with the picot edge bind off. That was my first time doing the picot bind off, which I always feel like it's important to kind of demystify these terms, because when I looked at this picot edge, and I've heard people say that they like to do a picot edge, and I've just, when I've seen and heard about a picot edge, I assumed that this was some like way difficult thing to do, or at the very least, I just didn't understand what would be happening to accomplish this. And let me empower you by saying that the picot edge is no scary thing if you know how to knit and you know how to do yarn overs and knit twos together. You can do the picot edge bind off. So essentially you knit to the length or that width that you want the overall border to be. And so from like the base of the picot to the actual tip and the peaks of the picot, that's how far you knit. And then you do a round of yarn overs and knit twos together. And then you match that same width or height or whatever you want to call that. And you sew them down in half. And essentially what it does is where you've done the yarn over, you've created this little bit of space so that when you fold it, it creates the little scalloped edge, which is so sweet. But like in my head, I thought I was going to be doing I think actually what I thought might be happening were like little baby German short rows, which seemed like a nightmare. It wasn't difficult, but it was time consuming because it was just another one of those things where you have to knit double the length of what you want it to be and then fold it and sew it down. Now, the pattern calls for a 3-needle bind off to sew that down. Now, when I knit my All Good dress by Magdalena Parker, those finishes were also all done with 3-needle bind offs. And I love a 3-needle bind off, actually. I enjoy the process of it. I find that to be enjoyable. What I don't love is the fact that to do the 3-needle bind off, first you need to pick up the stitches on the part of your work that you're going to be sewing to. So I don't mind doing the 3-needle bind off. I just don't like the part where I have to pick up all of these stitches. And especially when you're considering the fact that I'm knitting these dresses in my size, which is typically on the bigger end. And so there's a lot of stitches to pick up. And I just feel like there's so much room for error when picking up those stitches that I wind up really stressing out about it. And I just don't love that process. So I also had received some encouragement from Vilma of Sage Knits and Things, who said, like, just do whatever sort of sewn edge is going to be best for you. And I had a big sigh of relief because I had seen a tutorial by, I think it's Very Pink Knits, where she was doing a picot edge and literally just like scooped up a stitch from the picot edge and tacked it down to a stitch in the actual part of the work she was folding up to. And is that called a running whip stitch?
She's doing a running whip stitch on a heart, and all I really want to do is a running whip stitch.
I would be inclined to call it that just based on like how it goes, but basically just sort of tacking down as you go. Now, I think that the only concern that I had with this technique is that if you're not careful, you can make that too snug and therefore sort of scrunching up the work when this really is supposed to kind of flare out a little bit. So I was just very careful and decided to go with that method instead of the 3-needle bind off. And that saves me a ton of time. And at the end of the day, I think because I'm knitting with the brushed alpaca silk, it's not so visible that I cared. It's slightly less attractive than the 3-needle bind off, but at the end of the day, it is at the hem of the dress. No one's seeing it. So that was something that I was glad I did to save me some time. The overall border itself, I knit according to the pattern. So I knit for as long as it told me to in the different places. So if it said knit for 2 inches, I did. However, when I was following, basically because that border is made up of your twisted rib, then your eyelet, then your picot, and with a few little transitional things in between, when I followed the instructions to knit 2 inches of this and it was all in centimeters, but basically just the measurements given from the pattern, my border altogether wound up being closer to 4 inches. And that's okay because I actually did I wound up after I filmed the last video, I tried on the dress and saw that I actually felt like I was in a good place in the skirt and figured I never wound up hanging it like I said I was going to because I knew I wasn't going to want it any shorter than it was. And I also was too lazy to consider the fact that I might want to rip back. So I just went ahead and started the border and was like, it is what it is now. If it winds up touching my toes, like that's what it is. But I actually think that the length wound up being perfect. I just think that if you're going to knit this pattern, something to note is that the estimation in the pattern of how wide the border is supposed to be, I don't feel like was completely accurate. So I would suggest that you maybe see. I would maybe just give yourself a little bit more leeway or just keep better tabs on it if you are knitting this pattern for how much length you allow yourself or leave for yourself to add after the honeycomb is done. Okay, so now kind of working back up the dress. I'm thrilled with all the honeycomb. Something that I haven't mentioned yet too is that there aren't increases in this skirt. I think a lot of people assumed that, and I've actually had a lot of comments talking about the different things that I could do when I was struggling with what length I should knit it to and how much yarn I was going to need. I had a lot of people like mentioning, oh, well, in the increases in the skirt, you could do this and this and this and this. And I was like, oh, wait, no, there aren't any. You pretty much knit your bodice and then rapidly increase, creating like a gathered skirt that sits under the bust, which is also part of why I was concerned that this could wind up looking like a maternity dress. And in the end, I don't feel like it doesn't look like a maternity dress. If anything, the way that I would explain this is a little bit more like it has regal nightgown vibes. Like it's sort of shapeless in a way that it looks like it could just be a sleeping outfit in a very fancy way. My family had the Polar Express on at Christmas, and I almost felt like I belonged on the train. So that was my overall thought on the shape of how this wound up looking. That being said, it makes knitting the skirt just so simple and mindless, and the honeycomb was definitely my favorite part of knitting this. I did wind up, again, we're like working our way up the dress. I did wind up trying to aggressively block the bodice portion of the dress. So I have noted in the past that I felt like I could have knit the bodice about, I think, an inch, maybe even an inch and a half or 2 longer. And I was hoping that blocking it more aggressively would save it. I think I got a little bit of additional height out of the bodice, but not enough to completely get the look that I was going for. That being said, by the time I got to doing all of the finishing things that I thought were going to take me an evening and inevitably just did not, I did not trust wet blocking the bodice as I thought I might be able to. I wound up giving it a really good spritz and a good steam. The whole dress got a good steam block. And the only things that I pinned out were the hem so that the picot edge wouldn't flap up, and hopefully to just open it up a little bit because I wanted a little bit of that bell shape. And the only other thing that I aggressively pinned was actually the bodice in the vertical way. So I was not blocking the bodice at all horizontally. It was completely a vertical, aggressive pinned block. And I think that that did a few favors for me. So I'm definitely glad that I did that. I might try and wet block it still. I think that there's a correlation between the way that the dress is pretty shapeless and floating over me a little bit more so than I would have liked, between that and the fact that the bodice was not knit long enough. As it is, the bodice ends just slightly underneath my widest or the full bust measurement. I think that had I knit that to cover the entire bust so that it did truly nip in back again under the bust at the rib cage, the fit of the dress would have had just that slight bit more of like figure flattering, or not even that, but more just like it would have hit me again at that smallest point, reminding you that there is a person under there instead of just sort of this thing where it's like hovering over everything. Now, I'm not mad about it. In that way, I'm actually very comfortable. I always prefer my clothes to be a little bit looser in like a chic way, not like a, unkept way. I like that sort of like boho flowy, hovering over my body type look, type feel. It's more comfortable. But I think in this instance, I could have benefited from the bodice coming all the way over the bust. Now, if I were to pull it so far, it would completely expose the whole bra situation. So it's not perfect, and that's okay. Now, again, moving up, we have our sleeves. Now, the very last thing that I had on my list of things to do for this dress was to sew the hem, all the hems on the bottom of these sleeves as well as on the tops, they're sewn edges or folded over edges. And then they are supposed to contain some elastic to allow them to keep their shape as well as hold up the dress. Now, the pattern is a little bit scarce in this department. It's pretty much like, do the sleeves, finish the sleeves with some 3-needle bind offs, make sure there's some elastic in there. All right, girl. And I was glad that I sort of had the wherewithal to not completely sew those seams and leave myself about an inch or so of unsewn hem until I went and threaded the elastic through. Now, this is where we're going to get into a little bit of more crisis mode, because now we're talking, it's Christmas Eve, and I wanted to have been done with the dress the day before, and I figured I'm just going to spend an hour putting this elastic in, and then I just have to block it, and then I just have to do, it was that kind of thing where it was like, oh, it's going to take 2 seconds. It didn't take 2 seconds. I started out with a skinnier elastic in the hem of the sleeves, and I used a safety pin to insert as I would in a sewing casing where I'm putting elastic in. I'll always use a safety pin, pop it on the elastic, and use that to sort of guide the way through the casing and pull it out the other end. At that point, I sewed the elastic to itself so that that was secure and finished off that little space that I had left in that casing where the elastic went. And that worked out successfully for both of the hems of the sleeves. The shoulder part of the sleeves, I thought it might be wise to use a thicker elastic. So I basically went with the thickest elastic that I could comfortably fit into this casing. So something that was about an inch wide. And it was a little bit more of a struggle to get it through, but not so much so that I felt like I was forcing anything. However, I got about halfway through and I must have squeezed the safety pin so as to open it while it was in the middle of the casing. And once that happened, it was like, that was the breaking point. The safety pin got itself just tangled inside of all of the knit fabric. I mean, think of all those little grooves and nooks and crannies in a safety pin. And now I've got the sharp points of the pin sticking out of one part of the fabric, still attached to the elastic on the inside where I cannot see. The head of the safety pin and all of its fun little nooks and crannies were each wrapped around like separate stitches. And I was like, what do we do? Someone get the wire cutters. Like, we're going to have to hack this safety pin apart because it could not come back out no matter how hard I tried. Thank God for my boyfriend because he was able to unbend the safety pin from within, and we were able to pull it out that way. So once we got it out, I tried again. I was more careful and I sewed down the elastic just as I had in the hem of the sleeve. And I figured, let me just try this on first to make sure that this is good. And thank God I did, because the elastic was so tight. I'm so bad with figuring out the length elastic should be. I often feel like I either cut it way too long so that it is just useless, or it does that thing. And I think if you sew, you probably have seen this before, where you cut the elastic in such a way, or it's so short, or there's so much material trying to go around it, that it like prevents the elastic from snapping back into its state, and it's just hovering inside of the fabric, like stretched out. Is that a thing? Maybe it's just me. But it was bad. It was very snug. I liked that the width of the elastic felt so secure on my shoulder, but it was just so tight. And like the fact that the elastic goes within the casing that wraps around your shoulder. We're not talking from front to back. We're talking that it's literally like it's gripping your shoulders and under your arms to hold the dress up. So this wide elastic was just like, it was uncomfortable. It was too tight, but it was also that it was uncomfortable because of the way that it grabs your arm to hold on. So I said, no, just go with the skinnier elastic. It'll be fine. I did. That wound up being more comfortable. Admittedly, not the most comfortable thing still. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just particularly sensitive to the fact that it's holding your armpit. Like, this is the shoulder and the sleeve is like, and that's what's holding the dress to you. So it's pretty structural, but it is what it is, right? So then my whole grand plan this whole time. So then the dress was done. Steam block it, good to go. My plan the whole time was that I have these Spanx that in my memory had very wide set straps. Now, I also didn't realize just how wide set these sleeves would be. So Christmas morning, I left for this moment where I was going to, and I insert some yarn through the sleeves kind of so that it was behind the elastic and then coming out the other side. And I said, I'm just going to tie that to the straps that go over my shoulders, like the bra straps, and that'll keep everything really secure on my shoulders. Now, you may have already noticed that I'm trying not to, but the way that this wants to do this, and I'm over here like linebacker style trying to hike these things up. The straps are not as far apart as I thought that they were. In fact, they sit about here, which was not working. That was not happening for me. So on Christmas Day, that morning said, nope, all right, forget that idea. I grabbed a couple safety pins. I safety pinned the front of this to the bra. And that was what was holding the dress up. I brought a change of clothes to Christmas because I don't like fussy clothing, and this was fussy. All that being said, the look of this is beautiful. I love the way that it turned out in like photos, and I think it still is something that I'm very proud of. However, this is the part where I'm going to tell you that if you're planning to knit this, and I don't think I'll ever knit one again, not because I didn't enjoy the process. I enjoyed the process greatly, just because I don't know why I would ever need a second one of these. But let's say we're all going to knit this again. Things I would do differently. Number 1, I would plan for the sleeves to make contact with more of the bodice than they do. When you knit the bodice, which is the first thing that you do, it's that double layer of fabric, like I said. And when you get to the length where it's supposed to fold over, you include purl stitches that you are then going to sew your sleeves onto. So that predetermines how much contact the sleeve is going to make under the arm here or onto the bodice. Now that I see where that on my body, and I think I have pretty broad shoulders too, but on my body, the way that sets this so far apart is just not comfortable. So I would have extended the amount of purl stitches that are included on that fold over point. I would say by at least 10 stitches. So I'd add 5 onto either side of where it tells you to put the purl stitches. I hope that this makes sense. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I would say add 10 stitches overall of purl stitches. That way, when you sew the sleeves on, the point of contact, instead of being all the way out here, initially makes contact a little bit more like there. And that would already set the sleeves in closer so that they're not as wanting as much to just slip off of my shoulders. That's number 1. Number 2, obviously, is knitting the bodice longer. I also think, see, there we go. I also think that I haven't mentioned yet, the size that I knit was based on the gauge that I got for my dress, which in the bodice portion, I used I'm reading it off my phone here. So I wound up using a 4mm needle, which got me 19.5 stitches per 4 inches. And in the skirt, I used a 6mm needle, which got me 16.5 stitches per 4 inches. And based on those numbers, I calculated what size I thought I should knit. And I think I wound up being kind of in between sizes. And I went for the bigger one. I think I could have gone for the smaller one because I do feel like if the bodice were knit just a little bit more snug, and if it actually needed to have that negative ease in order to hold on a little bit better, it would fit better. Which also, by the way, in the past I had mentioned that the stockinette sleeves, I used the 6mm needles for, and that was the ideal fabric for this yarn combination. And someone asked what the gauge was that I got, so yes, the 6mm was 16.5 stitches per 4 inches. And that was, I thought, the ideal gauge for this fabric. So yes, I would make those changes. It's mostly changes up in the bodice. The skirt I'm thrilled with. Like I said, keep in mind that the hem might wind up being a little bit longer than you anticipate. And that being said, I'm pleased with the hem. I would just allow myself maybe a little bit more time and not assume that it's an evening's worth of work. But otherwise, I mean, really, and those are things that I could fix. I could take out the elastic, maybe just sew down the sleeves a little bit further in. I've also thought about even just adding because it's a strapless bra that has like the convertible tabs on the inside so you can attach straps to it. I thought it might be wise for not only this dress, but just for dresses in general that have a wider set sleeve. Maybe I should just add another loop on that so that I could set the the straps out a little bit wider. And then my whole theory of tying this to that infrastructure would work. That being said, too, I do think that this whole dress is a little bit on the heavy side. And I will measure it, or I will weigh it once I'm not wearing it. And I'll put just how much it weighs here. But I think that it could benefit from a full infrastructure of like a corsetry or a bodice underneath that's very stable to the body. And then maybe this is just sort of tacked onto so that it has that extra, it needs extra structure to hold it up. Otherwise, I love the look of it. If I had given myself an additional week, I think I could have made these tweaks. So it's possible that I'll go back and revisit, or I'll just make the changes that I need to because I'm not wearing this every day. It was a labor of love. It was more than anything, this was me proving a point to myself of just how much I've learned and grown over this first year of knitting, and this being sort of the grand finale of it all. So in that way, I'm thrilled, and I should not be surprised that there are fit issues and that there are structural issues that I did not predict coming into it because we're a beginner knitter. So with all that being said, yes, I finished in time for Christmas. Yes, I'm happy with the end result, and I just have these couple of photos for now, and hopefully for Valentine's Day, we could get some really good, exciting photos because you know that I love to do that. In the meantime, I feel like I've just been rambling here, and like I said, this episode is just going to be a little bit different. What I want to share with you is that next week is going to be exciting because I have made, since finishing this, just a little bit of progress on our hibernating whip. I have made a little bit of progress on the Musselburgh hat. And by the time we chat next, I will have a new cast on that I'm so excited to tell you about. But I just wanted to keep things light and easy because it is officially going to be New Year's Eve this weekend. And I am enjoying some time with family. So that being said, if I forgot anything, just let me know in the comments and I will do better to mention it next time. I just didn't want to leave you hanging on this dress, and so I wanted to make it a point to get it out. And I just hope that you guys are loving the end result too. I love the look of it. I don't want my cons to sort of overshadow the fact that I love it. I just want to make sure that I voice those things because not everything is perfect in the end, but I'm extremely satisfied with the end result. So, if you enjoy knitting content, then definitely please consider coming to hang out with us here again. I do post my podcasts every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And if you enjoyed this video, definitely please give it a thumbs up. You can subscribe and ring the bell so that you don't miss these types of videos, as well as the fun ones that I like to sprinkle in between. All that being said, big ol' thanks for watching. big ol' happy new year. I will see you in 2024. That's all I got. All right, you guys. Bye.